They're all around us. There's nowhere to hide. It's only a matter of time before we all turn into one of them. But maybe, just maybe, we'll be able to make it out alive. With enough luck, the right tools, people you can trust, and of course, this podcast, you too will be able to survive the zombie apocalypse. Let's take a moment and talk about it. Hello and welcome back to Moment of Zen, a podcast about everything and nothing. Again, as always, I'm your host, Zhen, and I just want to thank everyone again for their support. You have no idea how grateful I am with all the feedback and support that I'm getting from all of you. Please rate, comment, review, subscribe, wherever you're listening to this, and thank you all again so much. So this week is part 2 of the zombie apocalypse. So if you haven't listened to the episode last week, I highly recommend you listen to it first before listening to this, as I will be referring to a few things I talked about in that episode. But if this is your first time listening and you don't care to listen to that episode, this is perfectly fine, because you don't really need to listen to that to really enjoy this episode. If you want the full zombie experience, though, you should definitely check it out when you get the chance. And a quick disclaimer, the contents of this podcast are for purely entertainment purposes. I am not a zombie expert, so I am not liable for anything that happens during the actual zombie apocalypse. And in the event of a zombie apocalypse, a lawsuit should be the least of your worries. So go ahead and sue me. Season 8 of The Walking Dead has just ended about a few weeks ago, and I'm sure that there are many of you who are still in need of your fix of zombies. If that's you, then you've come to the right place. And if you don't care about zombies, or you're just so sick and tired of zombies, then this episode may not be for you. But wait, before you go, I just want to say that the things that I talk about in this episode aren't just applicable to the zombie apocalypse. In general, a lot of things I talk about today are for general survival. So, and if you stick around, maybe you'll learn to survive World War III when it happens next year. Knock on wood. You heard it here first, folks. No, I'm just kidding, not really. Before I talk about how to survive the zombie apocalypse, I want to first set the sort of baseline zombie for this podcast. I know there are tons of different types of zombies out there, from your walkers from The Walking Dead to the clickers of The Last of Us and all the special class zombies you see in the Left 4 Dead series. For the zombies that will be discussed in this podcast, I want them to be as realistic as possible. So last week, I talked about the different possibilities of how zombies could exist in real life. And one of the possibilities is through a zombie virus. And that seems like the most popular way, at least currently in pop culture, to explain the sort of origin story of zombies. So we're going to go with a viral infection as the main culprit for the rise of zombies. Next, let's go over some of the attributes of these zombies. Like I said, I want to be as realistic as possible, so these zombies will not be like any of the video game zombies with any special abilities. And again, I mentioned in last episode that if a zombie apocalypse were to happen in real life, zombies aren't going to be, quote, undead. They're normal people, but they're under the control of the virus and have no free will or memory of their past selves. That means that, let's say, Jim, your best friend who was infected by the virus, after about a few hours after the initial infection, the virus has destroyed the majority of Jim's brain and essentially lobotomizing him and erasing all of his long-term memories. At the same time, the virus has taken over the anterior of his brain, which controls hunger and our basic animal instincts. That means the Jim that we once knew him to be is gone, and all he wants to do is feed his insatiable hunger and will do anything he can to satisfy it. And of course, one of the biggest questions, what about his strength and his ability to run? One important thing I want to reemphasize is that Jim is technically not dead. He may not be alive in the sense of who he was before the infection, but all of his bodily functions and organs are still technically alive. He's just being controlled by a virus and does not have free will of his own and is basically like a puppet. I know I said this earlier, but I just want to reemphasize this point. Since he's just a puppet of his former self, he'll be as strong as he was before he turned to a zombie. That means if he was able to lift, let's say, 100 pounds or 45 kilograms before he became infected, then that means that's how much he can lift as a zombie. Similar to his ability to run, if he can run 100 meters in, let's say, 15 seconds, then that's his speed as a zombie. Except that I kind of lied a little bit. To be realistic as possible, I can't ignore the fact that most of Jim's brain has been destroyed. You may be asking, why is this important? Well, it's pretty important, and it explains a lot about the incredible strength we see in zombies. What I'm referring to is our brain's unconscious instinct to protect ourselves from ourselves. We've all experienced this one way or another. Think about the last time you went to the gym or went for a run. If you haven't done either, then don't worry, I'm sure you can still relate to this. Picture yourself lifting some weights or running. Now imagine you're on your last set of weightlifting and you have 3 more reps left in that set. You're tired and every single neuron in your brain is telling you that you're tired, but you force yourself to finish anyways. I think everyone's experienced that sort of feeling in the workout when your brain tells yourself that you're tired and that you should stop. Or if you haven't ran in a long time and you go out for a run, after about a minute, your lungs are burning and your legs are heavy and your brain tells you that you should stop, but you continue instead. Well, at least some of us will continue. In the US military, they have something called the 40% rule, which basically goes something like when your brain tells you that you're done, you're only 40% done, which means that you can actually do about 60% more than what your brain is telling you is possible. Think of the famous saying, mind over matter. Whether or not you believe in the 40% rule or not, it is somewhat true, though the percentages are debatable and not scientifically proven. But the point I want to make is that our brain tells us to stop because it wants to protect itself from us. Even though you can do more, the brain doesn't want you to overexert yourself and risk injury. So what does this have to do with Jim? Well, that part of Jim's brain that tells him to stop is no longer working. So Jim can freely overexert himself. And if we assume the 40% rule, then as a zombie, Jim is both 60% stronger and faster. But the trade-off is he has a higher risk of injury. Not that zombies really care about injuries. So instead of being able to lift 100 pounds, he can lift about 160 pounds or 72.5 kilograms. Sounds pretty scary, right? But don't worry, like with anything in life, there are trade-offs. Even though Jim is 60% more physically capable, he can't form cohesive thoughts or strategize. All he does is look for food, which is you and me. And most importantly, I can't emphasize this enough that Jim is still technically alive. So to kill him, he just needs to get killed like any other ordinary person. So it's not necessary to have to destroy his brain like what you see in a lot of zombie movies. A fatal wound to the heart or any other vital organ will probably be just fine. To kind of sum up our zombie, the zombie virus is transmitted from person to person by contact of bodily fluids. The zombie will have physical attributes of the person that's infected multiplied by 60%. And the zombie can be killed in any way a normal person can be killed. So now that we have our zombie, we can get started with our apocalypse scenario. To keep in line with trying to be as realistic as possible, the most likely beginning of the apocalypse will probably happen in a major city like New York, Los Angeles, London, Paris, Tokyo, etc. I'm originally from the LA area, so I think it'll be easier for me to talk about the apocalypse if we set it there since I'm familiar with that area and I can explain a few things as an LA native. And for those of you who aren't familiar with Los Angeles or have never been to LA, here's just a brief picture of LA to kind of get you settled into the setting. So, Los Angeles is the second most populous city in the US with just under 4 million people. And of course, when we talk about Los Angeles, we don't only refer to the city, we typically refer to the Los Angeles metropolitan area, which includes other major cities like Burbank, Santa Monica, Long Beach, Glendale, Pasadena, etc., etc. So the LA metropolitan area's population totals is about 13.1 million people, an area of about 4,850 square miles, or about 12,500 square kilometers. So it's a pretty big area with a sizable population. So the median age in the area is about 34.6 years old, which is around the national average. LA is also very diverse with a very diverse racial background. I'm not going to go over all the percentages. Just know that it's very diverse. Probably one of the most diverse areas in the world aside from New York and London. And now that you've committed all these facts about LA into memory, let's jump right in. May 1st, 2018. It's noon. You're out eating lunch with your coworkers somewhere in downtown Los Angeles. At the restaurant, the local news channel is playing and you read the headline. Breaking news. Patient at UCLA Medical Center attacks nurse. You don't really make a big deal out of it and you think, oh, it's just another person with mental health issues. That's not a big concern to you. You're concerned with Taco Tuesday and how many $1 tacos you're going to eat today. Fast forward a few hours. You're back home from work. You're tired. You've had a long day of work and you were stuck in traffic for the past hour and a half. You look at your phone and your Facebook feed recommends an LA Times news article about the attack earlier this afternoon. Curious, you take a look at it. And it turns out the patient went on a bit of a rampage and had attacked more than just that nurse. He attacked several nurses, doctors, and a receptionist before LAPD arrived. LAPD officers tried a number of times to tell the patient to calm down and gave him many verbal warnings, but he ignored them all, and then proceeded to charge at the officers. Armed with taser guns, the LAPD officers fired direct hits at the patient, but they proved ineffective as the patient continued to lunge at one of the officers, biting off a part of his hand. Immediately, backup was called, and the other officers drew their guns and gave a quick warning that was ignored again. Officers quickly fired their guns at the patient, landing 12 of 16 shots directly into the upper torso of the patient. The patient still stands, looking directly into the eyes of the officers and starts to walk towards him before eventually collapsing. You take a step back and you think, damn, this guy was probably on bath salts or something. But after that, you don't think anything of it. The next day, Wednesday, at work, you and your coworkers ask each other if they've heard about what happened last night. Instead of working, you begin gossiping in the break room about the incident. You see your boss approach you and everyone disperses back into their cubicles. Meanwhile, a live press conference from the UCLA Medical Center is being held, where the LAPD Sheriff's Department will begin making a generic statement about how they're conducting an investigation on the matter. And during the live broadcast, as the sheriff is making his statement, a scream is heard, followed by a stampede of people bursting out of the hospital entrance. The sheriff turns his back to look at what's going on, and the camera quickly pans to the entrance of the hospital. A woman in a nurse's gown emerges from the entrance with bloodshot eyes and blood dripping down from her mouth. She lets out a terrifying scream and is then seen jumping on top of a man as he tries to run away. She is seen taking a huge bite of his arm and begins swinging her arms at the people trying to pull her away from him. Then a second bloody person emerges from the entrance and stares directly into the camera. He is then seen running towards the camera before the live feed cuts off. It's now noon. You and your coworkers decide on a place to eat, and as you walk outside, all you hear are police sirens and ambulances as they race around you. Confused, you look at your phone and your Facebook feed has just exploded with cell phone videos of deranged people attacking people all over the city. And as you're watching the videos, a notification pops up on your phone stating that Governor Jerry Brown has issued a state of emergency and that the greater Los Angeles area is now under martial law. You and your coworkers look at each other with confusion, not knowing what's happening, and all four of you are in a state of disbelief. Your boss comes bursting out of the office and tells the four of you to go home and that the office is closed early today because of the declaration of martial law. Still in the state of disbelief, you hear screaming coming from the next block over. You all turn your attention to where the screaming is originating, and to your horror, you see a middle-aged man pounce on top of a younger man and begins biting his face. Your coworkers stand there, bewildered at the sight. You, on the other hand, you think back to this podcast, and your first thought, how the hell did this guy know that the zombie apocalypse was going to happen exactly like this? And to that, I say, don't say I didn't tell you so. No, I'm just kidding. but really, jokes aside, you think back to this podcast and remember everything I talked about to survive the zombie apocalypse. Your quick thinking and instincts tell you to quickly go to your car and make your way to your house, because at your house is the key to surviving the zombie apocalypse. Survival. What's the best strategy for surviving the zombie apocalypse? Well, the first and most important thing about survival is preparation. Regardless of the situation, whether it's a zombie apocalypse, natural disaster, armed conflict, or whatever it is, it's important for you and your family to be prepared for anything. And what do I mean by preparation? Well, it's more than just having a survival kit. Part of the preparation process is talking to your family or friends about what to do in an emergency. You should discuss with your family different meeting places during an emergency. And the first and most obvious place to rendezvous would be at your house or apartment. In case not everyone is able to make it back home, you should have several backup places to rendezvous and set a time limit for when to move on from one location to the other. For example, if you're unable to make it back to your house on the day of the disaster, make a plan with your family to say, oh, if I'm not back home by midnight, then we'll meet at the park the next day. And if I'm not at the park at noon the next day, then meet me at City Hall the following day. And by having a sort of chain of rendezvous locations and times, it could help relieve some stress and anxiety in case you don't see a loved one immediately at home during a disaster. It kind of gives you a sense of hope that maybe they're at one of the other locations. And during an emergency, panic is one of the last things you want to do. The best rendezvous areas are open spaces like parks, schools, parking lots, so that you can easily identify the people around you and react to any sort of danger that may be there or approaching you. And of course, you don't want to be completely, totally exposed in the open. So, a landmark like a tree or a rock would be the best place to meet your family in case you need to hide. And when you choose a place to rendezvous, you want to choose a space that's far away from major roads because chances are it'll be very crowded, making it much more difficult for you and your family to be able to identify each other. And also, near a major road, there's a greater chance that the road would be blocked off because of infrastructure damage, or maybe it's just really badly congested. Also, you want to choose a place that is in between your house and where your loved ones may possibly be. Say, for example, if you live 20 minutes northeast of LA in Pasadena and you work at Union Station in downtown, then choose a rendezvous location somewhere in between. It'll make it easier for both parties to meet up. And of course, choose a place that everyone is familiar with. And what I mean by that is they know how to get there even without the help of GPS or Google Maps, because during an emergency, those services may not be available. So now that you're able to meet up with your family, the next important preparation you need to have is a survival kit. Regardless of where you live, everyone should have a survival kit in their house and one in their car. So they're useful for almost any sort of emergency situation. And if you're a Californian like myself, you should already have an earthquake kit. And if you don't have an earthquake kit, then I highly recommend you make yourself one, because we're due for a massive earthquake really soon. There's been a lot of seismic activity in the past few years, and even if you don't live in an area with earthquakes, natural disasters like tornadoes, flooding, hurricane, they still happen, so it's better to be prepared in case you need it. You'll thank me later. The survival kit. What do you need in there? Everyone's kit will be slightly different depending on the area you live, but here are some of the essential things that you definitely need in a survival kit. So first off, first aid kit, solar-powered radio, non-perishable food like canned food, bottled water, a multi-tool or utility knife, fire starter, so either matches, lighter, or flint, and any sort of prescribed medication or required medical equipment like glasses or insulin. So those are things that you definitely should have in your kit. And here are some things that aren't 100% necessary, but I highly recommend. And they are flashlight with spare batteries, spare clothes and a good pair of tennis shoes, post-it sticky notes and pen, cash, solar-powered charger, duct tape, map of the area, and a whistle. I think everything in this list is pretty self-explanatory except for maybe the post-it sticky notes. They're great for writing down notes if you've made it to your rendezvous location, but circumstances force you to move somewhere else. You can leave a note for your family telling them where you are and where you've gone. And they can also be used as kindling to start a fire. Last but not least are the sort of optional things to have in your survival kit. And these are a two-way walkie-talkie, paracord, large plastic trash bags, aluminum foil, fishing line, a survival guide manual, a stainless steel canteen for storing and boiling water, coffee filters for filtering boiled water, a face mask, heavy-duty gloves, and of course, for the zombie apocalypse, a weapon. And I'm sure many of you were waiting for this. What's the best weapon to use in the zombie apocalypse? Of course, if you're American, the first weapon that probably comes to mind is a gun or several guns. And if you guessed guns, then congratulations, you're probably not going to make it in the apocalypse. this is about survival. Sure, guns are a really good way to defend yourself against zombies, but they shouldn't be your primary weapon. In the apocalypse, ammunition is limited, so if you rely solely on your gun for protection, then what's going to happen after you run out of bullets? Or if your gun malfunctions? It becomes pretty much useless. And life isn't a video game or movie where zombies happen to carry ammo or you just happen to find spare bullets lying around. And if you say, oh, I'm just gonna have a huge stockpile of ammo in my survival kit, you need to take into account the extra weight and space that it'll take up in your kit. Not only will this slow you down, but it'll also reduce the amount of gear that you'll be able to fit in your survival kit. And also, the noise from the gun will definitely attract unwanted attention, whether it's from other zombies or other possible hostile survivors. Instead, your primary weapon should be a melee weapon, since they don't rely on ammo and theoretically be used limitlessly. The only drawback to a melee weapon would be it would require you to expend more energy, but again, this isn't about killing the most zombies, it's about survival, which means you want to engage as little as possible in any sort of combat. Now comes the real question. What's the best melee weapon against zombies? A machete? Katana? Chainsaw? Baseball bat? Nope. The answer is an axe. Not just any sort of axe. Ideally, you want an axe with a long handle, maybe 2 feet or 0.6 meters, and you want the axe head to be a single edge blade with a broad butt. The reason for this is an axe with a single edge blade and a broad butt allows for chopping or slashing as well as pummeling. And it could also be used as a tool for breaking through doors, chains, glass, or even its intended purpose of chopping wood. And a long handle gives you a better reach against a zombie, so they don't have to get as close to you before you can get to them. Guns should be used as a secondary weapon for extreme emergencies, like when there are multiple zombies that would be too difficult for you to deal with your axe alone. Or if you encounter hostile survivors, you can use your gun as a sort of deterrent. So now comes the question, what's the best gun to use? Well, after doing a lot of research, I think the best gun you should use is a 9mm handgun or pistol with a high round capacity, like a Glock 17. They're not the most powerful, but they're generally lightweight and easy to use and maintain. And in the US, 9mm ammo is the most commonly used ammo caliber. So there's a higher chance that if you do find ammo lying around, that it'll be 9mm ammo. Okay, now finally, you're all geared up, your family's with you, and they're geared up. How do we survive the apocalypse? Well, during any sort of emergency, your rate of survival goes way down the more time you waste doing nothing. So you need to move quickly. After you have all your things, you need to get away from large crowds as fast as possible, since more people means a greater chance of spreading the infection. This is definitely going to be very difficult in a large metropolitan area like Los Angeles. So if you're in LA, you probably want to avoid the 5, the 10, the 101, 405 freeways, since traffic on those freeways will probably be backed up for miles. If you're out of the city, then those freeways are probably going to be a bit better, so you should be good on those freeways if you're out of the city. So where do you go from there? Well, that's entirely up to you. But I would say you want to go to a secluded place that is somewhat difficult to reach. Ideally somewhere up in the mountains or the desert. The mountains are an obvious choice because of the abundance of natural resources like water and food. But the benefit of the desert is that because of its relative flatness, you will be able to see from miles away, and zombies wouldn't really be able to survive in the desert heat for very long. And if you do choose the desert route, I would highly recommend becoming nocturnal so you don't lose as much water from the heat. You should make sure that you have enough fuel to make your way back into the city to resupply, because you will be needing to resupply a lot more if you're in the desert. And if you can make it past 6 months doing this, then you're probably in the clear of the zombie apocalypse, since by then most zombies will be dead through either starvation or will have decomposed to the point where they're pretty much just ineffective. And I can't tell you how to survive during those 6 months, since it really depends on your situation. Best chances for your survival is to avoid confrontation of any kind. If you can just avoid zombies and only engage them in self-defense, that's perfect. And once you're out of the city, zombies kind of become the least of your concerns. You should be worried about other survivors. There are folks out there who become desperate in extreme situations, and this could potentially be dangerous for you and your family. So whether or not you want to form a group with other survivors, it's entirely up to you. Of course, there are pros and cons with either option, but I think it ultimately depends on how well you work with others. If you work well with others, then a group would be beneficial. I would say no more than 20 people. But if you're more of the lone wolf type, you're probably better off with a small group, like 3 to 4 people. And regardless of any situation or emergency you're in, the people around you will be the ultimate factor in your survival. Just remember to use your common sense and try not to panic when things don't go your way initially. Panic doesn't do any good for anyone, and all it does is cause more confusion, which is something that you don't want during an emergency. And to kind of sum up, whether or not you believe in the zombie apocalypse, I hope you did find this information at least somewhat useful and enjoyable. And in all seriousness, you should have a survival kit in your home just in case, because you really never know. Before I go, I just want to say, please, if you enjoyed this episode, please rate, review, and subscribe. It really helps with the business side of things, with getting more exposure to a bigger audience. And also, you can follow the podcast on Facebook. Just type in Moment of Zhen, and that is Zhen. And with that, thank you all so much for tuning in. This has been your Moment of Zhen. Until next time, take care and stay fresh. See ya.